July 16th, 1983. A woman working alone in a dying garage. Four men stumble out of a bullet-riddled van at midnight, covered in blood, burns, and shrapnel scars. She asks no questions. She repairs their van through the night, feeds them, refuses their money, and lets them disappear before sunrise. She never learns their names. They vanish without a trace. 25 years pass. Her life collapses. The garage crumbles. The town forgets her. Then 4 black SUVs pull up, and 4 decorated veterans step out to repay a debt that never expired. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories of quiet heroism and life-changing gratitude, please consider subscribing. What those 4 men did next would transform everything. Dust Haven, New Mexico, had the kind of silence that made people forget it existed. Highway 54 cut through the desert like a scar, and most drivers never slowed down long enough to notice the town dying beside it. Population 247, though that number had been painted over twice in 5 years, always trending down. The kind of place where tumbleweeds outnumbered dreams and the wind carried more conversation than the people did. Marlo Tate had stopped counting the days since her father died. 8 months felt like 8 years when you worked alone. The garage sat at the edge of town, where the asphalt gave way to sand, a squat building with corrugated metal walls and a sign that read, Tate and Son Auto Repair. The ampersand was a lie now. There was no son. There had never been a son. Just Marlo and her father, and now just Marlo. She wore his jacket most nights, denim faded to the color of old sky, with his name stitched over the heart. She told herself it was practical, that the desert got cold after sunset, but the truth lived deeper than that. The jacket still smelled like him, motor oil and coffee and the mint gum he chewed to hide his cigarette habit from her mother. Some nights that smell was the only thing that felt real. The fluorescent light in the main bay had been flickering for 3 weeks. She kept meaning to replace it, but never did. The strobe effect felt appropriate somehow, like the garage itself was struggling to stay conscious. She worked beneath it now, hands black with grease, rebuilding a carburetor on a truck that hadn't run since Carter was president. Nobody had paid her to fix it. The owner had abandoned it 2 years ago, but Marlo needed to keep her hands moving. Stillness invited thoughts she wasn't ready to entertain. The radio on the workbench played static. She'd lost the signal around 9 and hadn't bothered to adjust the dial. The white noise filled the space better than music would have. It matched the sound in her head, the frequency of exhaustion and grief running on an endless loop. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Mrs. Alvarez's terrier, probably. 3 houses down, and the closest thing to a neighbor Marlo had. Otherwise, the night belonged to her. Just her and the tools and the ghost of her father's voice telling her to check her work twice, measure 3 times, and never trust a part that came out of a box. She wiped her hands on a rag that had been red once, back when the world made sense. Now it was the color of every fluid that leaked from broken machines. She glanced at the clock above the pegboard where her father had hung every wrench in order of size. 11:47. Late enough that sleep should have been calling, but the office couch had lost its appeal months ago. She'd been sleeping there since the house felt too empty to bear. The knock came at 11:52. Except it wasn't really a knock, more like a scrape, metal on metal, the sound of something heavy dragging against the bay door. Marlo froze, wrench still in her hand. The garage sat far enough from town that visitors after dark were rare. The last person who'd shown up uninvited had been a developer from Albuquerque trying to buy her out. She'd sent him away with words her father would have been proud of. The scrape came again, weaker this time, less insistent, almost desperate. She set the wrench down and walked to the bay door. The concrete floor was cold through her boots. She'd been meaning to fix the heating system for 2 winters now. But parts cost money, and money required customers, and customers had stopped coming when the highway moved and took the traffic with it. Her hand found the door handle. She waited, listened. A third scrape, fainter. Like whatever was making the sound was running out of strength. She pulled the handle, and the door rose with a metallic shriek that echoed across the empty lot. What she saw made her breath catch. A van sat idling 5 feet from the entrance. Military green, the kind of paint job that was meant to disappear into forests and jungles. No plates on the front, no registration sticker on the windshield. The driver's side door was stitched with bullet holes, neat little punctures that formed a pattern like surgical sutures. The hood was smoking, white wisps curling up into the desert night. Oil pooled beneath the chassis, black and viscous, spreading across the dirt like an ink stain. 4 men stood beside it. Stood was generous. They were holding each other upright, a collective act of will keeping them vertical. The one in front was tall, maybe 6'2", with shoulders that suggested military bearing even as they sagged with exhaustion. His face was pale in the sodium light from the garage, skin stretched tight over bones, eyes sunk deep in their sockets. He had the look of someone who'd been running on adrenaline so long, the crash was inevitable. Behind him, a second man cradled his left side. His shirt was dark with blood, crude bandages visible beneath where the fabric had torn. His face was a horror of burns, blistered and raw, the kind of damage that spoke to white phosphorus or thermite. Despite the injuries, his eyes were sharp, tracking. The darkness behind them, like he expected something to emerge from it. The third man was broader, built like a linebacker, but he moved with the careful precision of someone hiding pain. He held his arm close to his body, and Marlowe caught the glint of a tourniquet fashioned from what looked like a belt. His other hand never left his side, fingers resting on something concealed beneath his jacket. The fourth was younger than the others, maybe 22, with the kind of face that belonged on a college campus, not whatever battlefield had chewed him up. His right arm hung in a makeshift sling, fabric torn from someone's shirt and knotted at his shoulder. But his eyes were what stopped her. Kind eyes, tired and terrified, and kind all at once. None of them spoke. The tall one, the leader, just pointed at the van. Marlowe looked past them. The highway stretched empty in both directions, a ribbon of asphalt disappearing into darkness. No headlights, no sirens, no pursuit. Just the desert and the stars and 4 men who looked like they'd crawled out of hell itself. She saw the tattoos first. The leader had ink on his forearm, partially visible beneath his rolled sleeve. Military insignia, the kind that required years of service and clearances she couldn't imagine. The burned man had similar marks on his neck, barely visible through the damaged skin. These weren't weekend warriors. These were professionals. The scars came next. Shrapnel wounds, recent enough that some were still seeping. The pattern was consistent across all 4, suggesting they'd been caught in the same blast. Combat injuries, the kind her father had shown her in old photographs from Vietnam, though he'd never talked about how he got them. The way they positioned themselves told her more than words could. They never turned their backs to the open desert. The broad one checked the highway every 30 seconds with mechanical precision. The young one watched the garage interior, even as he swayed with exhaustion. These were men trained to survive, and survival had become instinct. Marlowe made a choice. She stepped aside and gestured into the garage. Pull it in. The leader's eyes met hers for a fraction of a second. She saw surprise there, and something else. Relief, maybe. Gratitude. He gave a single nod and limped back to the van. The engine coughed to life, sounding like it was drowning in its own fluids. The van lurched forward, barely making it over the threshold before the transmission started grinding. Marlowe hit the button, and the bay door descended behind them, sealing with a heavy clang that echoed like a vault closing. The sound felt final. She was locked in with 4 armed strangers covered in blood, and nobody in town knew they were here. Nobody in town would care if they were. The men climbed out slowly, each movement calculated to minimize pain. They spread out instinctively, creating a perimeter even in the enclosed space. The leader stayed near the van. The burned man positioned himself where he could watch both doors. The broad one checked the windows, even though they were painted over with grime and hadn't been cleaned in years. The young one leaned against a workbench, breathing hard, face pale with blood loss. Marlowe walked to the van and popped the hood. The damage was worse than she'd expected. The engine block had taken at least 2 rounds. The radiator was punctured in 4 places. The transmission was leaking fluid from a crack that ran half the length of the casing. The oil pan had been scraped nearly through, probably from bottoming out on rough terrain at high speed. A normal shop would condemn it. Any mechanic with sense would tell them to walk away. The repairs would take 3 days minimum, and that was assuming she had the parts, which she didn't. She had until sunrise. Maybe less, depending on who or what was following them. She grabbed her rolling stool and slid under the van. The undercarriage told the rest of the story. Brake lines had been cut, not damaged. This wasn't accident or wear. Someone had sabotaged this vehicle, and these men had driven it anyway because they had no choice. She rolled out and found the leader watching her. Up close, she could see he was older than she'd thought. Late 30s, maybe. Lines around his eyes that suggested he'd spent years squinting into hostile suns. A scar ran from his left ear to his jaw, old enough to be silver, recent enough to remember. "How long?" he asked. His voice was rough, like he'd been breathing smoke. 6 hours if I work straight through. Maybe 8. We need it in 4. She looked at him, looked at the van, looked at the 3 other men, pretending they weren't listening. "Then you better hope I'm faster than I think I am." He almost smiled, almost. Instead, he just nodded and walked back to where his men waited. Marlo got to work. The first hour was diagnostic. She cataloged every point of failure, every damaged system, every jury-rigged repair someone had attempted in the field. Whoever had kept this van running before tonight had known what they were doing. The transmission had been patched with a mixture of epoxy and prayer. The radiator had been sealed with some kind of military-grade compound she didn't recognize. The oil pan had been reinforced with sheet metal and hope. These men had been running for a while, days maybe, pushing the vehicle past any reasonable limit because stopping meant dying. She didn't ask where they'd been, didn't ask what they'd done. Her father had taught her the first rule of the garage was that what happened outside stayed outside. You fix the machine, not the story behind it. The burned man, Silas she'd later learn, though she never asked his name, spoke first. It was 1:15 in the morning, and she was elbow-deep in the transmission housing when his voice cut through the silence. "Why are you helping us?" Marlo didn't look up. Her hands kept moving, disconnecting the linkage, feeling for the crack she knew was there. "Why do you need help?" Silence. Long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. "That's why," she said. She heard him shift position, heard the careful way he moved, favoring the burns, protecting the damaged tissue. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "Most people would have called the cops. Most people don't keep a garage open at midnight." Another silence, then something that might have been a laugh if it hadn't hurt so much. "Fair enough." At 2:15, she brought them water. The office fridge held 6 bottles, leftovers from a case she'd bought when the garage still saw customers. She handed them out without comment. They drank like men who'd been rationing for days, savoring every swallow. The coffee pot still had half a brew from that morning. She poured it into styrofoam cups, the kind with the blue pattern around the rim that had been discontinued years ago. Her father had bought them in bulk. She'd been using the same stock ever since. The coffee was stale and bitter, but nobody complained. The broad one, Idris though she'd never know it, wrapped both hands around the cup like it was precious. She noticed his knuckles were split, scabbed over, the kind of damage that came from hitting something hard enough to break skin and bone. From the vending machine in the corner, she pulled out a bag of peanuts. The machine had been empty for months except for this one bag, lodged in the mechanism, forgotten. She'd freed it last week during a particularly slow afternoon. Now she split it open and set it on the workbench. They ate in silence, small handfuls, making it last. Trying not to look desperate and failing. The young one, Penn she'd discover 25 years later, tried to help around 3:40. He pushed off the workbench he'd been leaning against and moved toward the van, good hand outstretched. Marlo pointed at a folding chair near the door. "Sit. You'll bleed on my tools." He stopped, looked at her, looked at the chair. "I can help. You can sit." Something passed between them. An understanding. He sat. By 4:40, she'd done the impossible. The transmission was rebuilt with parts cannibalized from 3 other vehicles in her salvage yard. The radiator was patched and sealed. The oil pan was reinforced with sheet metal and brazing. The brake lines were replaced with spare tubing from a '78 Ford she'd been meaning to restore. The engine block was still damaged, the rounds still lodged in the metal, but she'd rerouted enough systems that it would run. Not well, not for long, but long enough. She turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, then caught and held, running rough, but running. The sound filled the garage like a promise. The 4 men stood. The leader walked to her, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out a roll of bills, hundreds, maybe $2,000, more money than the garage had seen in 6 months. He held it out. Marlo shook her head. "Get out of here. We can't just take this without paying." "You're not taking anything. I'm giving it. Now go before whoever's looking for you figures out where you stopped." He stared at her. She could see him trying to find words, trying to articulate something that had no language. Finally, he just nodded and pocketed the money. They moved fast then. The duffel bag that had been sitting by the door, guarded with religious intensity, went into the back. She caught a glimpse of what was inside. Radios, weapons, documents sealed in plastic. This wasn't a camping trip gone wrong. This was something classified, something that would never appear in any official record. The burned man, Silas, paused at the driver's door. "If anyone asks, you never saw us." "I never see anyone," Marlowe said. "That's why people come here." He nodded, climbed in. The others followed. The young one, Penn, was last. He turned back, one hand on the doorframe. Their eyes met. "Thank you," he whispered. She didn't reply, didn't nod, just watched as he closed the door and the van rolled out into the pre-dawn darkness. The taillights disappeared down the highway, swallowed by the desert that had delivered them. Marlowe stood in the empty garage bay. The sun was starting to bleed color into the eastern sky, turning the darkness from black to gray to the pale blue that preceded dawn. She was exhausted. Her hands ached. Her back screamed. But she'd done it. 6 hours. 4 men who needed help. A machine that shouldn't run but did. She hit the button and the bay door descended. That's when she saw it. On the ground, half buried in the dirt and oil that stained the concrete, something metallic caught the light. She walked over, knelt down, brushed away the grime. A dog tag, single. The chain was broken, snapped under stress, or torn off in whatever violence had brought these men to her door. She picked it up, held it under the fluorescent light that had finally stopped flickering. The metal was warm, like it remembered the body it had hung against. No name, just a number stamped into the steel. 174423B. She turned it over. The back was blank, no blood type. No religious preference, nothing that would identify the man who'd worn it. She stood there for a long moment, thumb running over the engraved numbers, feeling the slight indentations. These men had been here. They were real. This tag proved it. Marlowe walked to the office, pulled open the desk drawer where she kept spare fuses and old receipts and the detritus of a business barely surviving. She dropped the tag inside and closed the drawer. She never thought about it again. Not when she finally crawled onto the office couch as the sun rose and the town woke around her. Not when she opened the garage that afternoon and worked on the truck with the dead carburetor. Not when weeks turned to months and months turned to years, and the memory of that night faded like the paint on her father's jacket. She forgot those 4 men completely. She didn't know she'd just saved 4 lives. She didn't know they'd spend the next 25 years searching for her. She didn't know that one night, one act of kindness without questions or conditions or expectations would echo across decades until it found its way back to her when she needed it most. The dog tag stayed in the drawer. The sun came up. The garage stayed open. Anne Marlowe Tate went back to being invisible in a town that had already forgotten she existed. Have you ever helped someone without expecting anything in return, only to wonder years later what became of them? Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness travel further than we'll ever know. If this story speaks to you, consider subscribing. You never know which moment might change everything. The developer came in 1985, 2 years after the night Marlowe tried not to remember. His name was Clayton Vorse, and he wore a suit that cost more than her truck. He parked his Lincoln Continental in front of the garage like he owned the space already, left the engine running, walked in without knocking. Marlowe was under a Chevy when he arrived. She heard his shoes on the concrete, expensive leather with hard soles that clicked with each step. Nobody in Dust Haven wore shoes like that. She rolled out on her creeper, grease streaked across her cheek, and looked up at him. He didn't wait for her to stand, just pulled a folded check from his breast pocket and held it out. $25,000 for the land, $30 if you can be out by the end of the month. She looked at the check, looked at him, wiped her hands on her coveralls and stood up. Not interested. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Tate, let me be direct. This town is dying, highway moved, traffic's gone. You've had what, 3 customers this month? 4? You're bleeding money you don't have to lose. Then I'll bleed." He folded the check, put it back in his pocket, pulled out a business card instead. "When you change your mind, and you will, call this number. Offer expires in 6 months. After that, you'll be lucky to get 15. He left the card on her workbench and walked out. The Lincoln pulled away, leaving tire marks on her lot like a signature. Marlowe picked up the card. Heavy stock, embossed lettering. Vorse Development and Holdings. An Albuquerque address. She walked to the trash can and dropped it in. The garage stayed open. Customers became rarer. Some weeks she'd see one car, some weeks none. The town was dying around her like Vorse had said, but dying didn't mean dead, not yet. Her mother's stroke came in 1994, a Tuesday morning in March when the desert was just starting to remember what warmth felt like. Marlowe got the call at the garage from a nurse at County General. Massive cerebral hemorrhage. Critical condition. Come now. She made the 2-hour drive in 90 minutes, her truck screaming down Highway 54 like it understood urgency. Her mother was still alive when she arrived, barely, hooked to machines that breathed for her and counted her heartbeats and displayed numbers that meant everything and nothing. She lasted 3 days, long enough for Marlowe to sit beside the bed and hold her hand and say all the things she should have said years ago. Long enough for the hospital to compile a bill that would haunt Marlowe for the next decade. $73,000, then the funeral, then the probate, then the medical debt collectors who called twice a week and sent letters in red envelopes and used words like obligation and liability and legal action. Marlowe took a night shift at the truck stop diner, 15 miles out on the highway, 4 nights a week, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., serving coffee to long-haul drivers and highway patrol, and the occasional wanderer who'd taken a wrong turn somewhere in Arizona. She'd get off shift, drive home, open the garage at 8, work until sunset, sleep for 3 hours, and do it again. The garage roof collapsed in 2001 during a monsoon that hit the desert like divine punishment. She'd been in the office when she heard the groan of stressed metal, the shriek of bolts tearing free, and then the thunder of corrugated panels hitting concrete. Rain poured through the gap, soaking everything, turning the bay into a shallow lake. She bought tarps at the hardware store, with money she'd been saving for transmission parts, climbed up in the rain with a staple gun and rope, and patched the hole herself. Mrs. Alvarez from down the street watched from her window, didn't offer to help. Nobody did. The town had decided Marlowe was a lost cause, and lost causes didn't deserve rescue. The bank letters started in 1998, but got serious in 2003. Foreclosure warnings printed on letterhead that got more official with each iteration, first from the loan department, then from legal, then from a law firm in Santa Fe that specialized in property seizure. She stopped opening the mail, let it pile on the office desk in towers of white and manila, and the occasional certified letter she had to sign for. The postman, Rudy Castillo, looked at her with something like pity every time he handed her another envelope. She thanked him and added it to the pile and went back to work. The town council meeting happened on a Thursday in October 2003. Marlowe didn't attend. She heard about it from Sheriff Wynn Kerrigan, who stopped by the garage the next morning with coffee and bad news. He set the coffee on her workbench and leaned against the wall. He was a good man, Wynn, honest, fair, the kind of cop small towns needed but rarely got. Council voted last night. Your property's been declared a hazard. They're giving you 6 months to bring it up to code or vacate. Marlowe didn't look up from the carburetor she was cleaning. Code hasn't changed in 20 years. The building was fine 20 years ago. Building's older now. So's the wiring. So's the plumbing. You know how it works, Marlowe. They want you gone. Let them want? Wynn sighed, pushed off the wall. I'll do what I can to slow it down, but 6 months goes fast. He left. The coffee went cold. Marlowe kept working because working was all she knew how to do. While Marlowe's world contracted, 4 men were searching. They didn't know each other's schedules, didn't coordinate their efforts, but they were all looking, hunting through databases and archives and faded memories for a woman whose name they'd never learned and a town that had ceased to exist. Colton Reeve became a lieutenant colonel. He taught tactics at West Point, spent his days lecturing fresh-faced cadets about asymmetric warfare and operational security and the importance of adaptability under pressure. His office walls were covered with maps, old maps. Maps from 1983 with highways marked in red and small towns circled in pen. Every leave, every break, he'd rent a car and drive through New Mexico, stopping at garages, asking questions nobody could answer. His wife, Patricia, brought him coffee one night while he pored over property records on his laptop. She set the mug down, looked at the screen, looked at him. 20 years, Colton. Maybe it's time to let it go. He didn't look up. She saved our lives. I'm not letting that go. Patricia kissed the top of his head and left him to his search. She understood. She'd married a man who believed in honor, and honor didn't have an expiration date. Silas Embry medically retired in 1991. The burns had healed, but the damage ran deeper than skin. He couldn't handle the heat anymore, couldn't do desert deployments. The VA classified him as 40% disabled and sent him home with a pension and a thank you for your service that felt hollow. He became a counselor, worked with veterans transitioning to civilian life, helping them navigate the gap between who they'd been and who they were becoming. His office was small, cluttered with books and medals, and a single photograph pinned to the wall. The van, the highway, the darkness of that July night. He'd taken the photo from the passenger seat just before dawn, the last piece of evidence before they crossed the border and the mission ceased to exist. He told his clients about the woman who'd saved him. Never her name because he didn't know it, just her kindness, her competence. The way she'd looked at 4 bloody strangers and seen human beings worth helping. Some of them cried when he told the story. Some of them smiled. All of them understood what it meant to be seen when the world had decided you were invisible. Idris Havel went private sector in 1995, started a security firm that specialized in executive protection and risk assessment. He had the skills, the contacts, and the reputation. Within 5 years, he was running operations in 12 countries and billing 7 figures annually. He used the money to hire investigators, real ones, former FBI and ATF, people who knew how to find what didn't want to be found. They came back with nothing. The town didn't exist in any database after 1990. The woman had no digital footprint. It was like she'd been erased by bureaucratic oversight or deliberate omission, and neither option made the search easier. Idris kept a file in his safe, thick manila folder, labeled with a date and a set of coordinates. Inside were reports, maps, witness statements from truck drivers who might have been through the area, none of it leading anywhere. He added to it monthly, refused to close the case. Some debts, he told his business partner, don't age out. Pen Unger lost his leg in Somalia in 1993, stepped on a mine during an extraction, woke up in a field hospital, missing everything below the right knee. The prosthetic they gave him worked well enough, but it changed how he moved through the world, slower, more deliberate, always aware of the ground beneath him. He became a teacher, high school history in a suburb of Phoenix, where the students were more interested in their phones than the past. But Penn made it interesting, told them stories about courage and sacrifice and the people who helped without asking why. He told them about the woman in the garage, never her name, never the details, just the core truth. Someone saved my life once, and I never got to say thank you. His students asked why he didn't just find her. He told them he'd tried, that some people slip through the cracks of history, become ghosts not because they want to, but because the systems designed to remember fail them. He told them this was a wrong he intended to right, even if it took the rest of his life. After school, he'd go home to his apartment and open his laptop. He'd search variations of the same terms he'd been searching for years. Desert Garage, New Mexico, Highway 54, 1983, Woman Mechanic. The results never changed, but he kept looking anyway because looking was all he had. The breakthrough came in April 2008, late on a Thursday night when Penn should have been grading papers. He was searching newspaper archives instead, digitized copies of small-town publications that had been uploaded to state databases. He was on page 47 of results when he found it. A photograph. Black and white, grainy, dated October 1979. A teenage girl holding a trophy, pride evident even through the low resolution. Her father stood beside her, hand on her shoulder, both of them smiling at something the photographer had said. The caption read, "Marlo Tate of Esperanza Flats wins regional junior mechanic competition." Penn stopped breathing. Read the caption again. Esperanza Flats, a town he'd never heard of. He searched the name, found a reference to a county merger in 1991. Esperanza Flats had been absorbed into Dust Haven. The boundaries redrawn, the name erased from official records. That was why they'd never found her. The town had changed identities. She'd been hidden by bureaucracy, lost in a filing cabinet somewhere in Santa Fe. Penn grabbed his phone, called Colton. It was past midnight on the East Coast, but Colton answered on the second ring, voice alert like he'd been waiting for this call for 25 years. "I found her," Penn said. Silence. Then quiet and steady. "Where?" "Dust Haven, New Mexico. Used to be called Esperanza Flats. I'm sending you everything now." Colton's voice changed, not louder, but harder, certain. "I'll make the calls. We move this weekend." Penn hung up and sent the files, sat back in his chair, stared at the photograph of the teenage girl with the trophy. She'd be older now. 51 if she was 16 in that photo. Half a lifetime had passed. He wondered if she even remembered them. Wondered if that night meant anything to her, or if it had been just another shift in a long career of helping strangers. He wondered if she was still alive. The next morning, Colton called Silas, then Idris. Within 12 hours, 4 men in 4 different cities had booked flights to Albuquerque. They'd rent a car, drive to Dust Haven, find the garage, find the woman, settle a debt that had been compounding interest for a quarter century. Marlo knew nothing of this. She was living the last days of her old life without knowing they were the last. The eviction notice had come that Monday. Sheriff Kerrigan delivered it personally, apologetic and professional, and powerless to change what the law required. 72 hours to vacate. The council had won. The bank had won. Time had won. She'd fought for 25 years and lost anyway. She spent Tuesday packing, tools into boxes, her father's wrenches wrapped in newspaper. The photograph from the desk, the one of them both holding wrenches, frame cracked but glass intact. She worked methodically, without emotion, because emotion would have stopped her, and stopping wasn't an option. That night, she sat in the dark garage, surrounded by boxes and memories, and the accumulated weight of a lifetime spent fixing things that broke. The moon came through the holes in the roof, silver light pooling on concrete. Somewhere in the distance, Mrs. Alvarez's dog barked. The wind carried sand against the walls in a sound like static. She thought about her father, wondered what he'd say if he could see her now. Probably something about knowing when to fold, about fighting smart, not hard, about the dignity in walking away from a losing battle. But she'd never been good at walking away. Neither had he. She stood up, walked to the office, started going through the desk drawers. She'd put off cleaning them for months, years maybe. Now it was required. The top drawer held pens and tape and old receipts. The second drawer held manuals and order forms and a calendar from 1997. The third drawer stuck. She pulled harder. It came free with a shriek of wood on wood. Inside were fuses, receipts, a broken watch her father had been meaning to fix, and underneath it all, something metallic that caught the moonlight. She pulled it out, turned it over in her palm. The dog tag. Number 17443B. She'd forgotten it existed. 25 years in a drawer, gathering dust, waiting. She held it up to the light, ran her thumb over the engraved numbers, wondered, for the first time since that night, if the men who'd worn it had survived, if they'd made it across whatever border they'd been running toward, if they were still alive. Probably not, she decided. Men running that hard from something that dangerous rarely made it far. They'd crashed somewhere in the desert, or been caught by whoever was chasing them, or died in some other classified operation that would never make the news. She set the tag on the desk, went to the office couch, lay down in her clothes because undressing felt like too much effort, closed her eyes, didn't sleep. At 3 a.m, she heard engines, not 1, 4, idling in perfect synchronization, a mechanical harmony that didn't occur naturally. She sat up, disoriented, walked to the office window, looked out through glass so covered in grime it turned the world sepia. 4 black SUVs sat in her lot, parked in a line, headlights on, engines running. As she watched, the drivers cut the engines simultaneously. The sudden silence was louder than the motors had been. Doors opened, 4 of them, 1 on each vehicle. Men stepped out, silhouetted against the headlights. They moved with military precision, positioning themselves in a formation that suggested training and purpose and coordination. Marlo's heart started to pound. She wasn't scared, not exactly, but something in her hindbrain recognized danger, the same instinct that had kept her ancestors alive on different planes facing different predators. The men started walking toward the garage, slow, deliberate. As they passed through the cones of light from the SUVs, she started to see details. The first man was tall, silver hair, broad shoulders. He wore a dark suit that fit too well to be off the rack. His posture was military, spine straight, shoulders back. Even at this distance, she could see medals on his chest, barely visible beneath his jacket. The second man had scars. They ran up his neck, visible even in the poor light. His face was weathered, but his eyes were sharp, tracking the garage, the lot, the empty highway like he expected trouble. The third man was broader, built like he'd played football once and never stopped training. He moved with confidence, expensive watch catching the light. Everything about him suggesting success and resources and the kind of power that came from owning things. The fourth man walked with a limp, not pronounced but there, a slight hitch in his stride, the kind that came from a prosthetic. He was younger than the others, or looked it, with glasses and a gentle face that seemed out of place in this midnight gathering. They reached the bay door, stopped. The tall one stepped forward and knocked, 3 times, firm, respectful. Marlowe walked through the dark garage, past the boxes and the tools and the van-shaped space where ghosts had once stood. She reached the door, put her hand on the handle, hesitated. 25 years. 4 men. One night she'd almost forgotten. She opened the door. They stood in a line, these 4 strangers who weren't strangers at all. The tall one spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of 2 decades searching. "Ma'am, do you remember July 16th, 1983? Marlowe's breath caught. The world tilted. She looked at their faces, trying to find the men she'd seen for 6 hours in the dark. The burned man, the young one with kind eyes, the broad soldier, the leader who'd tried to pay her. They were older, grayer, scarred by time and whatever wars they'd fought after that night. But the eyes were the same. Recognition hit her like voltage. The burned man, Silas, stepped forward. He pulled a photograph from his jacket, handed it to her. She took it with shaking hands, held it to the light spilling from the office, the van, her garage, the highway sign barely visible in the frame. Esperanza Flats, 2 miles. Evidence that the night had been real, that she hadn't imagined 4 ghosts and a vehicle that shouldn't run. "You saved our lives," Silas said, voice rough with emotion barely contained. "We've been looking for you for 25 years. The young one, Penn, took a step closer. "We never forgot, not for a single day." The broad man, Idris, spoke next. "You asked no questions, you asked for nothing, but you gave us everything." Colton, the leader, came to attention. His voice carried the formality of a man addressing a superior officer. "Ma'am, we're here to settle a debt." Marlowe couldn't speak, couldn't process what was happening. Her mind was trying to reconcile the broken men from 1983 with these successful, decorated, alive men standing in her lot at 3 a.m. The math didn't work. The timeline didn't make sense. She'd forgotten them, and they'd spent a quarter-century searching for her. Colton reached into his jacket, pulled out a leather folder, extended it toward her. "This is for you." She took it. Her hands were shaking. She opened it. What happens when someone you saved, someone you forgot, spends 25 years making sure you're never forgotten again? If this story resonates with you, if you believe in the power of gratitude that transcends time, please consider subscribing. Sometimes the debts we don't expect are the ones that change everything. Inside the leather folder, Marlowe found documents that made no sense in the context of her collapsing world. The first was a property deed. Legal language dense and formal, but the core message clear. The garage, the land, every square foot of dirt she'd been about to lose now belonged to her, paid in full, no liens, no mortgages, no bank breathing down her neck. Just her name on a title that said this place was hers until she decided otherwise. The second document was a set of architectural blueprints. She unfolded them carefully, the paper crisp and new. The plans showed her garage, but not as it was, as it could be. Modern bays with hydraulic lifts, updated electrical systems, solar panels across a roof that didn't leak, classroom space, an office that wasn't held together with duct tape and hope, At the top, in professional drafting letters, Tate and Son, Memorial Auto Repair and Training Center. The third item was a check. She stared at the number, counted the zeros twice, then a third time, because her brain refused to process what her eyes were seeing. Enough money to cover every debt she'd accumulated over 2 decades. Enough to live on while the garage was rebuilt. Enough to stop working herself to death at the truck stop. The fourth page was a letter, handwritten. 4 different styles of penmanship, each section signed by a different name. She read it slowly, her vision blurring halfway through. You asked no questions. You gave us everything. This is not payment. Payment suggests transaction. And what you did transcends commerce. This is gratitude. What you did for 4 strangers in the dark, you gave us our lives back. We all have families now because of you. Children who know their fathers, wives who didn't become widows, careers that wouldn't exist, lives that were meant to end in that desert but didn't because you chose kindness over fear. We couldn't find you in any database. You'd been erased by the town, by time, by a system that forgets the people who hold it together. But we never stopped looking, because a debt like this doesn't expire. It compounds, with interest, with love, with honor. Thank you, Marlo Tate, for everything. Colton, Silas, Idris, Penn. She read it twice, then a third time. Her hands were shaking so badly the paper rustled. When she looked up, all 4 men were watching her with expressions that carried 25 years of searching, of hoping, of needing to say thank you to someone who'd never asked for it. Penn stepped forward, the youngest though not young anymore, his limp more pronounced up close. I've thought about you every single day. What you did, it wasn't just fixing a van, you gave us a second chance. Idris spoke next, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd built empires but never forgot where he started. We all have families now because of you, kids, careers, lives we were supposed to lose that night. Silas touched his neck, fingers tracing the scars that had never fully healed. You could have turned us away. We were armed, bloody, dangerous looking. But you saw soldiers, not criminals. That takes something most people don't have. Colton's voice carried command even in gratitude. We couldn't find you in any database, ma'am. The town changed names. Records got lost. It was like you'd been erased, but we never stopped. 25 years of searching because some debts don't age out. Marlo couldn't speak. The words wouldn't come. 25 years she'd been invisible in this town, forgotten by everyone who'd ever known her name, and these 4 men, strangers she'd helped for 6 hours in the middle of the night, had spent a quarter century making sure she'd never be invisible again. Her legs gave out. Penn caught her, his grip strong despite the prosthetic, and helped her to the folding chair by the door. She sat heavily, the folder clutched against her chest, tears streaming down her face in a way she hadn't cried since her mother died. I don't understand, she managed. It was just one night, just a repair. I didn't do anything special. Silas knelt down so they were eye level. Ma'am, with respect, we were 4 armed men covered in blood showing up at midnight in the middle of nowhere. You could have called the cops. You could have turned us away. You didn't. That's everything. Penn knelt too, his kind eyes wet behind his glasses. You asked no questions. You didn't demand to know where we'd been or what we'd done. You just helped. That kind of trust, that kind of grace, it saved us in more ways than keeping the van running. Colton remained standing, but his voice softened. That van shouldn't have made it another 10 miles. You didn't just repair it, you rebuilt it in 6 hours while we were bleeding out on your floor. We made it to the border because of you. We survived because of you. Idris stood and walked to his SUV, opened the trunk, came back carrying something wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a hand-carved wooden sign, the craftsmanship, professional, and beautiful. He held it up so Marlo could see. The sign read, Tate and Son Auto Repair, established 1965, rebuilt 2008 in honor of Marlo Tate, who saved 4 lives and asked for nothing. He carried it to the garage wall, propped it carefully against the peeling paint. Construction starts Monday, if you'll allow it. Marlo stared at the sign, at the blueprints, at the 4 men who'd turned her last night in this garage into the first night of something she couldn't yet comprehend. Why now? Why search for so long? Colton pulled over another folding chair and sat down, his metals catching the light. Can I tell you what happened that night? The full story? She nodded, not trusting her voice. July 1983. We were special forces, part of an off-the-books extraction in northern Mexico. Target was a DEA informant's family, wife, and 2 kids. The cartel got wind of it, ambushed us 30 miles from the safe house. We barely made it out, lost 2 men in the firefight. The 4 of us grabbed the family, stole that van from a cartel compound, and ran. Silas picked up the story. We were disavowed. Command couldn't acknowledge us without causing an international incident. We had no support, no backup, no extraction plan. Just 200 miles of desert and 2 governments plus a drug cartel hunting us. Idris continued. The van was dying. We knew it. Transmission was shot, radiator was leaking, oil pan was cracked. We'd been patching it for days with field repairs that shouldn't have worked. When we saw your garage light, it felt like Providence. Penn's voice was quiet. We thought we'd die that night, all of us, the family too. We'd accepted it. Then you opened that door and everything changed. Colton leaned forward. You rebuilt that van in 6 hours, alone, with parts you shouldn't have had and skills most mechanics couldn't match. We made it to the border, got the family to safety, completed the mission, all because you asked no questions and did the impossible. Marlo wiped her eyes. I didn't know any of that. I just saw people who needed help. That's what makes it extraordinary, Silas said. You didn't need to know. You just helped. No judgment, no conditions, no price. That kind of humanity, it's rarer than you think. Penn added, after that night, we all went back to our units, got deployed again, fought other battles. But we never forgot you, never stopped talking about the woman in the garage who saved us. It became part of our story, part of who we were. Idris stood, pacing now. When we all finally retired or transitioned out, we made a pact. We'd find you, thank you properly, repay what you'd given us. We started searching in 2003. 5 years of dead ends. The town didn't exist in any database after 1991. You had no digital footprint. It was like you'd been erased. Colton's voice hardened. That made us search harder, because a woman who saves 4 lives shouldn't disappear, shouldn't be forgotten. We owed you better than that. Penn smiled through his tears. 6 months ago, I found a newspaper photo from 1979. You winning a mechanic competition. The caption said, Esperanza Flats. That's when we realized the town had changed names. All our searches had been looking for the wrong place. Once we knew where to look, Idris said, we found you in 3 days, found out about the eviction notice, the debts, the years you'd been struggling, and we knew we'd gotten here just in time. Marlo looked at the blueprints again. You're going to rebuild the whole garage? Colton nodded. From the ground up, state-of-the-art facility. But it's more than that. We're creating a training center. Young people from small towns, kids who can't afford technical school, they'll come here and learn, free of charge. We're funding scholarships, creating programs. Your father built this place to teach people how to fix things. We're going to help you do it on a scale he would have been proud of. Silas added, every kid who graduates from here, every mechanic who learns their trade in this building, they'll know who taught them and why. Your story, your kindness, it becomes their foundation. Penn leaned forward. We're naming the scholarship fund after your father. Every year, a student from a struggling background gets a full ride to technical school. No questions asked. They just have to want to learn and be willing to help others the way you helped us. Marlo couldn't stop crying. I don't deserve this. All 4 men spoke at once. Yes, you do. Colton stood, came to attention. The other 3 followed. They didn't salute. This wasn't a military moment, but they placed their hands over their hearts in a civilian gesture of respect and held it for 5 full seconds. The sun was starting to rise. Golden light spilled across the desert, turning the sky from black to purple to orange. The same light that had risen the morning those 4 men drove away in a van that shouldn't run. The same light that had risen on 25 years of Marlo being invisible. But this morning felt different. This morning, she was seen. Colton lowered his hand. Construction starts Monday. We've already hired the contractors. 6 months, and this place will be ready. You can stay in the office during construction, or we've arranged temporary housing in town if you prefer. Your choice. Everything's your choice now. Marlo looked at the garage, the collapsing roof. the stained concrete, the peeling paint, the building her father had poured his life into and she'd fought to keep alive. "Can I watch the construction?" Silas smiled. "Ma'am, you can do more than watch. You're the foreman if you want to be. This is your facility. We're just making it possible." "I want to be involved. I want to know every beam and wire and bolt. If my name's going on it, I want to know it's built right." Idris laughed, a real laugh that carried relief and joy. "We wouldn't have it any other way." They sat there as the sun rose, 5 people connected by one night and 25 years, and a debt that transcended money. Marlowe asked them about their lives. Colton talked about his daughter, how she was studying engineering at MIT and wanted to design sustainable infrastructure. Silas talked about his wife, a nurse he'd met at the VA, and their 2 sons who played hockey and asked too many questions. Idris talked about his security firm, how he'd built it from nothing and now employed over 200 people, many of them veterans who needed a second chance. Penn talked about his students, the ones who paid attention and the ones who didn't, and how teaching history was really about teaching hope. They asked about her father. She told them about learning to rebuild carburetors when she was 8, about grease under her fingernails at her first school dance, about the way he'd taught her that machines were honest in ways people often weren't. They asked about the garage, the lean years, the moments she'd almost given up. She told them about the roof collapse, the medical bills, the slow erosion of hope. "You never gave up," Penn said. "Through all of it, you kept the doors open." "Didn't have a choice. This place is all I know." Colton shook his head. "You had a choice every single day. You chose to keep fighting. That takes the same kind of courage you showed us that night." By 8 in the morning, the town was starting to wake up. Mrs. Alvarez walked her dog past the garage and stopped, staring at the 4 black SUVs and the group of people sitting in folding chairs like they were having a sunrise meeting. She waved tentatively. Marlowe waved back. Sheriff Kerrigan's cruiser pulled up around 9. He got out slowly, hand near his weapon out of habit, relaxing when he saw Marlowe was safe. He walked over, taking in the scene with a cop's eye for detail. "Everything all right here, Marlowe?" She stood up, smiling wider than Wynn had seen in years. "Everything's perfect. Wynn, these are some old friends. They're going to help me rebuild the garage." Wynn looked at the 4 men, at their posture and bearing, at the way they positioned themselves with tactical awareness, even while relaxed. "Military?" Colton stood, extended his hand. "Retired. Lieutenant Colonel Colton Reeve." Wynn shook his hand, recognition dawning. "I've heard of you. You taught counterinsurgency at the War College." "Guilty. These are my associates. We're here to help Miss Tate with a construction project." Wynn looked at Marlowe. "The eviction notice?" "Taken care of," Idris said. "The property's been purchased outright. All debts settled. The council's notice is void." Wynn's eyebrows rose. "That's going to make some people in town very happy, and a few very confused." He tipped his hat to Marlowe. "Good for you. You deserve some good news." After Wynn left, Colton made phone calls. By noon, contractors were driving out to assess the site. By evening, architectural engineers were taking measurements. By the end of the week, demolition permits were filed and construction schedules drafted. Marlowe worked alongside them, reviewing every plan, questioning every choice, making sure the new building honored what her father had built while embracing what it could become. The 4 men came back every weekend, sometimes bringing family. Colton's daughter spent a Saturday learning to change brake pads, her hands getting dirty for the first time in her life, and loving it. Silas's wife brought lunch for the entire construction crew, insisting everyone eat together. Idris brought his team to volunteer, ex-soldiers and security contractors spending their weekends carrying lumber and pouring concrete. Penn brought his students, turning the construction site into a living classroom about trades and skills and the dignity of work. The town watched the transformation with a mixture of awe and confusion. The garage that had been an eyesore, a condemned property nobody wanted, became a hub of activity. Workers arrived at dawn and stayed until dusk. Materials were delivered daily. The old building came down carefully, each piece sorted for salvage or disposal. The new structure rose in its place, modern and clean, but designed to echo the original. 3 months into construction, a local news crew showed up. Channel 7 from Albuquerque, doing a human interest story about revitalization in small towns. They interviewed Marlowe on camera, asked her about the project. She told them the truth, or as much of it as she could, without revealing classified missions and military secrets. 4 men whose vehicle she'd repaired years ago had tracked her down to say thank you. They were helping her rebuild, so she could teach young mechanics the way her father had taught her. The story aired on a Tuesday evening. By Wednesday morning, Marlowe's phone was ringing with calls from other veterans, people who'd been helped by strangers and wanted to pay it forward. Donations started arriving, small checks from people who'd served and understood the value of gratitude, larger checks from organizations that supported veteran causes. By the end of the month, the scholarship fund had enough money to send 10 students to technical school. The grand opening happened on a Saturday in November, 6 months after that midnight meeting in the parking lot. The new Tate & Son Memorial Auto Repair and Training Center gleamed in the desert sun, solar panels catching light. The sign Idris had carved mounted above the main entrance. A bronze plaque beside the door read, "In memory of those who help without asking why." The town showed up. All 230 residents, plus people from neighboring communities who'd heard the story. Sheriff Kerrigan gave a short speech about perseverance and community. The mayor, who'd voted to condemn the property, gave a longer speech about economic development and the importance of skilled trades, carefully avoiding any mention of his earlier opposition. Colton spoke briefly, his words simple and direct. This facility exists because one woman chose kindness over fear 25 years ago. Everything good that happens here, every student who learns, every life that's changed, it traces back to that choice. Marlowe cut the ribbon with a pair of oversized scissors, feeling ridiculous and grateful and overwhelmed. The doors opened and people flooded in, touring the bays and classrooms and the office that had real furniture and a coffee maker that wasn't older than she was. Young people, teenagers from Dust Haven and surrounding towns, asked questions about the program. When could they apply? What did they need to know? How much did it cost? Nothing, Marlowe told them. It costs nothing. You just have to want to learn and promise to help someone else when you get the chance. By evening, she had 47 applications for the first class starting in January. The 4 men stayed until everyone else had left. They stood with Marlowe in the main bay, the space clean and bright and full of possibility. The smell of fresh paint and new equipment filled the air where motor oil and desperation had lived for so long. Penn walked to the wall where a shadow box hung. Inside was the dog tag, number 174423B, and beside it, a photograph of Marlowe's father, young and strong, holding a wrench. Penn touched the glass gently. "He'd be proud of you." Marlowe stood beside him. "He'd say I took too long." They laughed, the sound echoing off walls that had never heard joy like this. Colton pulled an envelope from his jacket. "One more thing. We didn't want to overwhelm you earlier, but there's this." He handed it to her. Inside was a letter from the Secretary of Defense. Official letterhead, formal language, but the message was clear. The mission from July 1983, previously classified, had been partially declassified to recognize civilian assistance. Marlowe Tate was being formally commended for actions that directly resulted in the successful extraction of 4 operators and 3 civilians from hostile territory. The letter thanked her for her service to her country and her unwavering commitment to helping those in need. She read it twice, then looked up at Colton. "I didn't do this for recognition." "We know. That's exactly why you deserve it." Silas added, "This goes in your file, official record. You're part of the story now, not just a footnote." Idris smiled. "And if anyone ever tries to make you invisible again, they'll have to answer to us." Penn put his arm around her shoulders. "You saved our lives. Now you're going to change hundreds more. That's legacy." They stayed until midnight, talking and laughing and remembering. Marlowe told them about the night from her perspective, how strange and surreal it had been, how she'd almost called the sheriff, but something stopped her. They told her about the extraction, the firefight, the desperate drive across 200 miles of hostile desert. They told her about the family they had saved, how the kids were adults now with children of their own, how the mother had become a social worker, helping other immigrants navigate the system. "They know about you," Colton said. "We told them years ago. They asked us to give you this." He handed her a small package. Inside was a hand-embroidered cloth, traditional Mexican design, and a note in Spanish and English. "You saved the men who saved us. We pray for you every day. Thank you for giving us our lives." The note was signed by Maria, Carlos, and Elena, names she'd never heard, but lives she'd touched across the distance of a quarter century. By the time the four men left, promising to visit often and stay involved with the program, dawn was threatening the eastern sky again. Marlowe stood in the doorway of the new garage, watching their SUVs disappear down the highway, taillights fading into the coming light. She went back inside, walked through the bays where young people would soon learn to diagnose engines and repair transmissions, and understand the satisfaction of fixing what was broken. She ran her hand along a workbench that didn't wobble, tested a lift that rose smoothly, turned on lights that didn't flicker. In the office, her office, she sat at a desk that wasn't held together with duct tape. She pulled out the dog tag from the shadow box, held it in her palm. The metal was still warm, like it remembered the body it had once protected. She thought about that night, four strangers appearing from darkness, a choice she'd made without thinking, because thinking would have meant hesitating, and hesitation would have meant turning away. She thought about the years between, the struggle and loneliness and slow erosion of hope. She thought about persistence, about keeping doors open when every rational voice said to close them. She thought about her father, about the lessons he'd taught her. Check your work twice, measure 3 times, never trust a part that comes out of a box. And the lesson he never said directly, but lived every day. Help people, because that's what the work is really about. 25 years, 4 men. One night that had felt like just another shift, but turned out to be the axis on which her entire life would eventually turn. She'd forgotten them, and they'd never forgotten her. She'd been invisible, and they'd made sure she'd never disappear again. The sun came up. Light spilled through windows that weren't covered in grime, illuminating a space that smelled like possibility instead of decay. Marlowe Tate stood up, put the dog tag back in its place of honor, and got ready to do what she'd always done. Help people, teach them, show them that machines were honest and work had dignity and kindness compounded across time in ways that defied mathematical logic. The first class started in January. 15 students, ages 16 to 24, some from Dust Haven, others from towns even smaller and more forgotten. Marlowe taught them the basics, how to read a manual, how to diagnose by sound, how to respect the tools and the machines and each other. She told them about her father, about learning the trade in this very spot, back when the building was different, but the purpose was the same. She told them about the night in 1983, carefully editing out the classified details, but keeping the core truth. 4 people needed help. She helped them without asking why. 25 years later, they came back to say thank you. That's the lesson, she told her students. Not the repair work, not the mechanical skill. The lesson is that kindness echoes, that helping someone without conditions or expectations or demands for recognition, that kind of help changes trajectories in ways you'll never see, but that matter more than you can imagine. Her students listened. Some understood immediately, others took longer, but they all learned and they all graduated. And they all went into the world carrying the lesson Marlowe Tate had learned from her father and proved on a July night when 4 ghosts knocked on her door. By the end of the first year, 47 mechanics had been trained. By the end of the second, 93. The program grew. Other garages reached out, wanting to create similar training centers. Marlowe consulted, helping them design curricula and establish standards. The model spread across New Mexico, then Arizona, then Texas. Small towns with dying economies found new life in technical training that gave young people skills and dignity and a path forward. Colton visited quarterly, bringing his daughter, who eventually became a civil engineer specializing in sustainable small-town infrastructure. Silas came monthly, conducting workshops on mental health and resilience for students who carried trauma they didn't know how to name. Idris funded expansions, his security firm hiring graduates and creating pipelines for young mechanics to find work. Penn brought his students every spring, turning the facility into a field trip destination where history met practical skills. The town changed. Dust Haven stopped dying. New businesses opened. Young people stayed instead of leaving. The population counter at the town limits needed repainting again. But this time, the numbers went up. Marlowe kept working. Not because she had to. The financial pressure had evaporated the night 4 men showed up with blueprints and impossible gratitude. She worked because the work mattered, because teaching mattered, because every student who learned to fix a transmission or diagnose an electrical fault was carrying forward something her father had started and 4 strangers had saved, and she had the privilege to continue. Some nights, when the facility was quiet and the students had gone home, she'd walk through the bays and remember the old garage, the flickering light, the leaking roof, the desperate years when keeping the doors open felt like pushing against gravity itself. She'd remember the night that changed everything. Though she hadn't known it at the time, she'd think about the dog tag in the shadow box, about 4 men who'd been running from death and found life in the last place they expected, about a quarter-century of searching and the moment they finally found what they'd been looking for, about debts that didn't expire and gratitude that compounded and the strange mathematics of kindness that defied every rational calculation. Years passed. The program kept growing. Students graduated and got jobs and started families and taught their own children that helping others wasn't weakness, it was strength. That asking no questions wasn't naivety, it was grace. That the world was harsh enough without good people making it harder. Marlo got older. Her hands developed arthritis. Her back complained about the years of bending over engines. But she kept teaching because the work wasn't done, would never be done. Every generation needed to learn the same lessons. Competence, integrity, the satisfaction of fixing what was broken. The 4 men got older too. Colton retired with full honors. Silas published a book about veteran mental health that became required reading at the VA. Idris sold his company and devoted himself to philanthropy. Penn kept teaching, kept telling the story, kept making sure his students understood that history wasn't just dates and battles. It was moments when ordinary people made choices that rippled across decades. They stayed in touch, phone calls, visits, the occasional group dinner when schedules aligned. They became family, bound not by blood, but by one night and its endless echoes. Marlo Tate never married, never had children, but she had students, hundreds of them, thousands eventually. They carried her forward. They became the legacy her father had started and 4 men had preserved, and she had multiplied beyond anything she'd imagined possible. The garage with the repaired van became a story people told, a parable about the power of helping without conditions, about the way small acts compound across time, about debts that transcend money and gratitude that outlives its origin. It became part of the town's identity. Dust Haven, the place where a woman saved 4 lives and 25 years later, they saved her back. The place where kindness wasn't just a nice idea, but a practical philosophy that rebuilt a business, trained generations, and proved that forgetting someone was a choice, and remembering them was too. On quiet nights, when the desert wind carried sand against the walls and the stars burned cold and distant, Marlo would stand in the doorway of the facility and look out at the highway where 4 men had once appeared from darkness. She'd think about alternative histories, the version where she'd called the sheriff, the version where she'd turned them away, the version where she'd demanded answers before helping. In those versions, 4 men died, a family died, hundreds of students never learned their trades, a town kept dying. Her life stayed small and forgotten, but she'd chosen differently. Not because she was heroic or visionary or special, just because helping was what you did when someone needed help. Because her father had taught her that machines broke and people fixed them, and that was the entire purpose of the work. One choice, 6 hours, 25 years of searching, a lifetime of echoes. The building stood, the students came, the work continued, and in a shadow box on the wall, a dog tag waited. Number 174423B, proof that ghosts could be real and debts could be repaid, and kindness, even when forgotten, never truly disappeared. It just waited for the right moment to come home. Sometimes the smallest acts create the largest ripples. Sometimes helping, without asking why, becomes the story people tell for generations. If you've ever been saved by someone's unexpected kindness, or if you've helped someone and wondered if it mattered, this story is your answer. It always matters. Please share this if it moved you, and consider subscribing for more stories about the quiet heroes who change everything.